Welcome into warchant.com. I'm joined by the man, Corey S. Clark, senior writer, warchant.com. And Corey, we're going to go down memory lane, but it's going to be a dark, scary lane we're going down to. It's a dark alley. There's nothing really good going on there. But now we got to do this because something about losses, they're indelibly, they scar our soul, but we remember them so vividly. And I was reminded by that when we put up a post in the Tribal Council. We came up with this idea of, hey, let's talk about the most gut-wrenching losses of all time, put a thread in the Tribal Council, and it's still going strong. I mean, there's been thousands of views, hundreds of replies. Everybody remembers I was here when this happened. I remember, all the vivid details we seem to remember more in detail than we do when it's a big win. I don't know what it is about them. So we figured, why not? We've been talking about all these great wins in our war chats. Well, let's throw in a few of the all-time greatest losses. And I know you and I come up with a pretty good list here, don't you think?
Yeah, and when you're talking about a program like Florida State, like I write in the article, it's like, well, Miami has a bunch of really painful losses too. USC, Florida State, Florida, they have a bunch of painful losses. I think if you're a good program that's usually relevant and usually playing for national championships or being in the top 10, there are going to be some daggers that you never get over. And it's like I equate it to, you hear poker players talk about bad beats, and that they always remember the worst beats they had more than the time they got lucky on the river. It's always when somebody got lucky on the river against them and they lost all their chips. There's just something more memorable. It resonates more for some reason. Maybe like when you ask a girl out and she says no, you remember that more than all the ones that might have said yes. I don't know. They never said no to me, Gene. But
I didn't have Benny say yes, so I don't know. I remember the yes.
I'm talking about the average man. But yeah, I just think there's something about that, man. And when you grew up at Florida State in the 80s and the 90s, as great as it was, and as most weekends you were happy, but there was always, it seemed there was those one or two weekends where it really crushed your spirit, some of these losses.
I'm glad you said that, because when I was going through this list and I created it, and all these, the top 10 that we've come up with, and we're going to release 10 through 6 today, we're going to talk about. I was like, man, have other schools had this? I mean, it's unbelievable when you start going through these games. I mean, these ridiculous losses that just all these fluky stuff had to happen for FSU to lose in these very meaningful games. Most of them are against rivals. It's hard to believe that every program, but I guess they have, like you said. I mean, it happens to all the great programs. But when it's your program and you look at it in detail, you're like, well, this is just ridiculous. Nobody has this number of crazy losses all the time, it seems like. Although we're going back to I think we're going all the way back to a 1966 game.
Right.
So we're covering a pretty large gambit of games for Florida State. Well, before we get going on this, Corey, there's a long list of ones that just missed the cut. There were a lot of games that were really tough games, and a lot of people nominated these on the Tribal Council. But I want to throw out a few of these and get your quick take on them. One of the ones, now there was two Georgia Tech games and two NC State games that were on the list, and we just picked one over the other. I think you could have gone either way.
Right.
And I want to start with the one that just missed the list, and that's the 2010 NC State game. That is the dreaded Ty Jones knocking the ball at a Christian Ponder at the end. I mean, what was your take on that game? How big a loss was that for Florida State?
I mean, that when you talk about it was and we'll talk about another one very similar to that in a second. But you're guaranteed. You've already convinced yourself they're about to go take the lead. My only concern watching the game was, are they going to score too quick to give Russell Wilson a chance with 36 seconds left to make a couple plays and get in field goal range or get a chance to throw a touchdown pass? But other than that, you've already convinced yourself, okay, they're going to score. Let's just see how quick they do with it. And then your quarterback gets blindsided by the running back. It's one thing to lose, like if somebody makes a great tackle and the ball just pops out, or a kid tips it up and makes a great interception. It's another thing to do it to yourself, like literally like Keystone Cops stumbling and bumbling, and you fumble the ball yourself when nobody's near you, and that's how you lose the game. I remember the aftermath below the stadium in the locker room or outside the locker room after that game. That was devastation. Yeah. I don't think it comes close to the other NC State game a couple years later. Or it comes close, but it didn't reach that levels. But it was devastation just because of the shock of it. Ponder led them down the field. I think they were at the 6 or the 8 or something, and they were getting ready to score a touchdown.
Was the receiver open? I remember the play. I think I was there too, talking to Jimbo at the time, and I think he said the receiver, whoever was I don't know who was on the route, but he was wide open.
Yeah. I think it was a tight end. And, yeah, they were going to be wide open for a game-winning touchdown or go-ahead touchdown. And then Ponder just gets stripped from behind by Ty Jones, his running back, and loses the game. That was an inexplicable way to lose a football game.
I'll say the only reason people may ask, why did you put the 2012 one in the top 10 and not this one? I'll say the difference to me is Russell Wilson. As we know, he's a pretty decent quarterback. He's been tearing it up in the NFL, it seems like forever. The other one, you got beat by Mike Glennon. So to me, that's why that's a little bit more. You can lose to Russell Wilson, that's acceptable. You can't lose to Mike Glennon. You can't give him.
Well, I also think we'll touch on it, but also stakes. You were number 3 in the country for the 2012 game. Yeah. You had a huge lead. This one was just like it was a rebuilding year that turned out to be a decent season, but not much was really lost with that game. Not like the 2012 one.
No, the other one I want to bring up, really, we'll go through them all real quick. The other ones, I missed a couple. The other one, talk a little bit more detail because, again, it kind of tears my heart out a little bit, this one. And a question I want to ask you, I'm talking about 2015, the loss at Georgia Tech. Now, Corey, because you know the history, and I've been around as long as you around this team, but you know the history better than anybody that I know. Was this the worst loss from at least a decent FSU team, a good to above average FSU team? Was this the worst loss they'd ever suffered at least to the worst team ever? Because that Georgia Tech team they lost to in 2015 was a really bad team.
That was their only ACC win, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were 3-9. They won one ACC game against Florida State. And this was, a Florida State team that year won 10 games.
Yeah, that was they had won like whatever it would have been, like 25 in a row in the
regular season games. Yeah.
I think back then they were undefeated for that game. They were like 5th or 6th in the country, maybe higher than that. Yeah, when you think about the mediocrity of, not even mediocrity, just the inferior opponent, to lose like that, to even be in the game where it would come to something like that. Yeah, I would say that's probably when you really take a step back, considering the talent level disparity. That was probably the worst loss of Jimbo's career when you throw in the context of who they've lost to.
You have Dalvin Cook. You had some great players in the team.
You had Everett Golson, which didn't help. It didn't click with him. But what's funny about that game that I remember is I think that was 2 weeks after the Michigan State game, where remember Michigan was just all they had to do was get the punt off, and they got the Michigan State returned it for a touchdown on like the final play of the game. And I remember asking Jimbo about that play. And I wrote this whole glowing story about how that stuff would never happen to a Jimbo Fisher coach team because he thinks about all those kind of possibilities. So you wouldn't put just a bunch of big bodies on the line of a field goal block. Because I asked him about the kick six too. Like those two plays, like how do you prepare to not have something like that? He's like, we want to get a couple good athletes on the field for every field goal, just in case it gets blocked or something crazy happens. I wrote that story literally that week. Or like, I know it's my fault. It's just like when I jinxed Renegade before the Orange Bowl. I just have that knack for jinxing things, and I jinxed Jimbo Fisher, and they lost again. Completely inexplicable.
I mean, I know it was a long field goal, but the one thing about Aguayo was always he would have that ball would jump up. It could be very high, very difficult to block. So, I mean, I was there on you were probably on the sideline too, Corey, at the time. It was surreal to see that ball blocked and then the run around the end happening. It was almost like, unlike the other Georgia Tech game we're going to talk about in a little bit, it was so absurd. It was ridiculous they lost that game, where the other one was more gut-wrenching to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
All right, a couple of these others I'm just going to run through real quick. These are the ones a lot of the fans put out there, so I want to bring them out there. The 2001 Orange Bowl loss to Oklahoma, 13-2. I guess the most frustrating thing about that is you had the number one offense. You had all these stars, and the offense was shut out by Oklahoma in this game. I think it was 6-0 going into the fourth quarter, and you had opportunity after opportunity. I mean, you talk about Javon Walker's drop. Robert Morgan dropped it in the end zone. I mean, it's nuts when you think about they lost this game, but it was on the heels of Mark Richt getting the Georgia job. That played a role. And then Snoop Minnis, who we had on the other day, was ineligible for this game. So, I mean, those two things, at the time I didn't think that was going to be – I think they were still a 10.5-point favorite.
Yeah.
Even with those things happening. And they still somehow couldn't score a point and lost the game.
And that was a great, great Florida State defense, as evidenced by only giving up one touchdown in the national championship game. Winky wasn't good. His receivers didn't help him. And, I know there'll always be the what if of I always loved that argument. Not even an argument, just like the what if Mark Richt had just left and just gotten out of town and not coached in that game. And my retort to that is always, okay, well, it would have been Jeff Bowden. It's not like they were going to bring in a great OC for just one game. Bobby was already promoting his son, so he would have just expedited the process, and Jeff Bowden would have been coaching that game. I don't know if it goes any better.
Yeah, I think the Menace absence was bigger because go back and look when key moments, that was his go-to guy that season.
Oh, he was great. Menace was incredible.
The alpha dog. And I think didn't they switch Atrus and Javon? They switched their positions on the field for that game.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, Javon didn't play much that year because he sprained an ankle, but he was probably their most talented receiver. I think that played out in the NFL. And I'm telling you, the first or second drive, he drops a square in where he walks into the end zone. It's a perfect pass. Hits him right in the chest. The safety had overcommitted, and he's going to sprint 60 yards for a touchdown. It just hits right off the 8 and the 0.
Yeah. Unreal. A few other ones. Auburn, Florida State, 1984, 42-41, Corey. We'll talk about a shootout back then. You know, Auburn scored the game-winning touchdown with 48 seconds left in that one. That was a really good team. I mean, they lost 3 games that season, but every single one was by a highly ranked team that they lost to in 1985.
And I think Auburn finished like 11-1-1 or 12-1 or something. They
were preseason number 1. I didn't realize I went back and did a read. They were preseason. They'd actually lost, I think, 2 games. Or had a loss and a tie or something.
Yeah, I think they might have had a loss and a tie, but the end
they were preseason number 1 that year.
And obviously they had Bo, although Bo didn't play in that game. They also had Brett Fullwood. But what always sticks out about that game, Gene, is that Florida State before, and I've told this story before, and people that remember that game remember this. Florida State going out for the coin toss, they won the coin toss. The referee said, what do you want to do? And they said, we want to kick. Not we defer, but we want to kick. Oh. So that was their choice. So then when they come out for the second half, they asked the Auburn captain, what do you want to do? And he says, we want to receive. Because now it's our choice. So Florida State had to kick off both halves. And in that second half kickoff, the ball, the kid's returning it. He fumbles it. It squirts around right into this other Auburn dude's hands who runs untouched 70 yards for a touchdown. Take that away. Recover that fumble, you win that game. There was a lot of craziness in that game.
Shootout. Of all the games you want to get one less possession, that was a shootout game. So, I mean, it wasn't a defensive struggle. That extra possession.
Oh, yeah.
The game.
And it wasn't on TV because Auburn was on probation.
Oh, thank you, Auburn.
There you go.
Good of them. All right, another one a lot of people brought up, and we talked about it a little bit because we've been talking a lot. And, you know, I don't know if this is going to air first or the last war chant with Bobby Butler, but a lot about that 1980 season. One of the ones a couple people mentioned was the 81 Orange Bowl against Oklahoma. J.C. Watts driving down for the game-winning – well, not the game-winning. Actually, it would have been the tying score with the extra point. But Oklahoma goes for 2. And unlike FSU all these times, they actually get the 2-pointer.
Right.
Deny Florida State. It looked like Florida State was going to get their revenge against Oklahoma, but they pulled it out despite Oklahoma had a bunch of fumbles. FSU outplays them, but still they came up with the win at the end.
Yeah, and that was their second 1-point loss of the season in that stadium. And I think the most painful thing about that game for old school Florida State fans is that on that last Oklahoma drive when they went to actually win the game, Florida State dropped 2 surefire interceptions. One's a pick 6, where it was a lob pass where the kid read it perfectly and just bumble and dropped it. And another one where a linebacker or a DB, I can't remember who, but just went right through his arms. And you make that play and the game is over. The game is over. But, that's funny. You remember was it 16? I think it was 16 up at NC State when Florida State, Francois led them back to win the game late, NC State. And remember, there was a safety for NC State that dropped what would have been just an interception thrown right to him. And then I think on the next play or 2 plays later, Francois throws the game-winning pass. Florida State fans probably barely remember that.
I barely do.
Yeah, it was only 4 years ago. But the painful loss from 40 years ago, you can still remember like it happened 5 minutes ago.
Well, there's one we'll talk about here. Maybe not today. I think it's going to be the next one. But there's one involving Rufus Brown, too, that reminds me of the same thing.
There you go.
We'll talk about – most people probably know which game I'm talking about there. Again, to your point, that happens. Now, this wasn't on my list, but a lot of people brought it up. I get it. It was a national championship game. It was against a rival. And I'm talking about the 96 Sugar Bowl against Florida. You lost that one. You got blown off you got blown out that game. A bunch of players were sick. Florida had the better team. You outplayed them at home. They got this fluky bunch concurrence of events that got them a rematch against Florida State that they really didn't deserve. But it's on the list. You lost a national championship game. I get it.
Yeah, I think the hardest part about that game for Florida State fans was that you had to play them in the first place. Nebraska had to lose. I think Nebraska would have been like a 2-touchdown favorite in that Big 12 championship game, and they lost to a mediocre or just a kind of average Texas team. If that doesn't happen, then you're playing Nebraska. And even when that did happen, if Arizona State beats Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, Florida can't win the national championship.
Yeah.
But Ohio State scores, I think, with 25 seconds left. So then you knew that a couple nights later when Florida and Florida State were playing, Florida, instead of playing just to keep from Florida State winning a national championship, was playing for their first one. And you know they had all the motivation. And it's just really hard to beat a team that great twice in Florida State.
Spurrier has a month to prepare, and it's not in Tallahassee. Yeah, it was really unfortunate it played out that way. But anyway, we'll move on from that one. Now, to satisfy our old school people, I have to bring up this one, Corey, and that is the 1966 game against Florida. Of course, everybody knows it by the Lane Fenner catch. You know, there's multiple. I think we've got, Aslan, our video production manager, is putting this all together, and I've got the still shot of Lane Fenner catching the ball for it was under a minute, the game-winning touchdown in that game. Of course, the SEC official ruled it incomplete, which really, that not only stinks, for one, because you lost a game against your rival that you really did win. It also stinks because Florida State had only beat Florida one time prior to 1966. So this was huge to beat your in-state rival, who still kind of treated you like the redheaded stepchild. You would have been able to beat them again at home, and that got taken away.
And I wonder, because I'm pretty sure that was the year Spurrier won the Heisman. I wonder if he loses that game, if he wins the Heisman. Like, if
I never thought of that. Yeah.
Resume, I don't know that he wins the Heisman even.
Yeah, it could have been. Of course, we got to throw in the 1993 at Notre Dame game. It was it was the first game of the century. ESPN Game Day, the very first one they did on the road up there in South Bend. All the shebang, all the pomp and circumstance around that game. It really wasn't Florida State played an awful game. They fell way behind. They made a little bit of a run. They had to convert that 4th and 20 to Kes McCourty for the touch, and a little bit flukish there to get them within striking distance. And they did drive down and made it close at the end. But again, I guess what was on the line at the game at the time, we thought Florida State had lost their national championship. It turned out not to be. But it was tough at the time to see that loss.
Yeah, it was tough for a week, right, for 6 days. And even after the loss, I think in one of the polls, Florida State only dropped to number 2, ahead of undefeated West Virginia, and I feel like there might have been another undefeated team, but I know
Nebraska, obviously.
Yeah. So, but they were ahead of West Virginia and Nebraska in the poll after that game. So you thought there was a chance maybe that they could get a rematch in the Fiesta Bowl, but then Notre Dame went ahead and took care of that by losing the next week. But for those 6 days, you thought that was your all-time great team. And then you lost to, Notre Dame.
Did you go to that one, Corey?
I did. I was there. Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Impressive. Yeah. Yeah, I did not. I was doing that from the old defunct now AJ Sports Bar. And you could tell the people dragging out of that place, boy, it was a sad scene. It was like a wake.
Oh, it was a wake. Yeah, it was a funeral. And what I remember about that trip was we stayed in this hotel like 35 minutes outside of South Bend. And I couldn't sleep. Number one, my dad snored like a chainsaw, but also just the anticipation of the game. And so like at 7:15 in the morning, I've already woken up for a 3:30 game. I'm like, I'm up. I'm going to walk around. And my dad comes into the room and goes, Lou Holtz is outside. And I go, no, he's not. He goes, yeah, Lou Holtz is right outside. And then we go outside, and that's where the Notre Dame team stayed the night before the game.
Oh, wow.
Was in the hotel we were at. So we saw them all getting on the bus going to South Bend.
That's a good story. First I've heard that.
They were big dudes.
It's basically we're spending this much time, and these are ones that didn't even make the cut. There's one more left. We could probably get a list of 50, but there's one more on the list that a lot of people brought up. They got to bring up, and I know it's one of your favorites, Corey, and that is the 2009 Miami it's the Jarman Forson game. I mean, that's all you got to say. You know what that is. That was a crazy back and forth game the whole time. Florida State drives on the field. You think it's the game-winning touch, and I'm more mad. I was more mad at the time, not so much of the drop. It was a low pass, should have been caught. It was a drop. The fact there was still a second or two on the clock. So what happens is, because he kind of fumbled, it was incomplete. I mean, there's photos. I was sitting in that end zone at the time I watched play. It was an incomplete pass. What happened is all the time the officials are trying to figure out is it complete, not complete. The clock's running down. Well, obviously, if it took you that long to figure it out and it's incomplete, it's not like it was complete and then it was incomplete. There's a second or two left on the clock. It wasn't fourth down. Florida State gets another play, but they never – I wonder in this day, more in replay, if that would have been challenged and maybe they got that second back and maybe they win the game.
Yeah, I think it was more. Yeah, they were looking. They spent the whole entire review just looking at whether it was a catch, and the more important factor was, there still should be at least a second on the clock. And I mean, look, I'm not trying to take a shot, but you would have hoped the sideline or somebody in the booth would have been like, look, there's still a second. Tell them to look and make sure there's still a second left on the clock.
Yeah.
No, they just looked and said the game was over. And, as we all know, it sparked Ja'Cory Harris's Heisman campaign.
Oh my God! Yeah, Ja'Cory Harris threw for what, like 380 yards in that game. And that's how bad that defense was that year.
Yeah, he looked like the number one pick. He just torched them. Ja'Cory.
Well, back in the late 2000s, a lot of teams did that.
They all did. Yeah.
So it was pretty pathetic. All right. So all that was those are just ones that didn't make the cut. So now we're going to unveil our real list. Here's the top 10, starting at number 10. We need like the David Letterman. I don't know if Aslan can put the old David Letterman top 10 on.
That's right.
That'd be kind of cool if you could do that graphic. Anyway, if you can't, here's number 10. We alluded to it before, but the 2008 Georgia Tech game. And you were probably at that too, Corey. I mean, to me, that was unbelievable. I think one of the things that makes up when you're really talking about a gut-wrenching loss is a game where you think you're going to lose, you come back, and you've got the game won. You feel all your heart you've got it won, and then something flukish happens and you lose the game. And I will never forget, I'm in that end zone shooting photos, and I'm looking in before this play, 3 plays in a row, Jermaine Thomas is gashing Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
They're done. I'm looking at their bench. Every player has their hands on their knees. There were some that were walking the locker room. The fans are all doing Surrender Cobra. It was done. That game was over. Their defense had given up, and then the unthinkable happens. Jermaine Thomas pulls himself out of the game. I guess he's tired. Anton Smith had been hurt, so they tried to bring him in for a play. He couldn't do much. He wasn't there. Right. All that was left on the bench was Marcus Sims. So when they're first and goal or second and goal is at 3 or 4 yard line, and then it's funny if you listen to the broadcast, I forget who it was, it's going to take a miracle. And Georgia Tech got answered. They got their miracle answered with a prayer.
Yeah, they got a couple miracles in that stadium this century.
Yeah.
And that one, I think when you talked about the Jamar Fortson game, I think even more so is every Florida State fan knows what you're talking about if you say the Marcus Sims game.
Yeah.
Everybody knows. And look, at least that one, unlike the Ponder fumbling at NC State when Ty Jones hit him, at least that one was caused by a Georgia Tech dude hitting him. It wasn't his own guy hitting him. But, yeah, the ball pops forward right into the defensive backfield. It's in the end zone. Ponder almost recovers it but can't quite get to it. And, yeah, you're right. That was because they were already – they were already – yeah, like you said, it was already over. Like Georgia Tech fans, and I think we're coming to grips with, they're about to win. We're about to blow this game to a team we're probably better than. I think they thought they were the better team that day, and they probably were, but their quarterback got hurt. So they had to put in the Shaw kid, and he had a couple turnovers. Devontae Richardson had a big pass.
Touchdown pass.
And Florida State was going to have this all-time great feel-good win. They're at the 3 yard line. They're about to go in for the score. You've already come to grips with the fact what a great win this is. And then the next thing you know, you see the ball popping out in the end zone. And making it even worse, they were already in field goal range.
Yeah, and they were only down 3.
Get stopped. You're going to overtime probably, and you're going to overtime against a backup quarterback that has thrown interception and fumbled in back-to-back series.
What's unbelievable on the play, I don't know how much you remember from the play, so that you're right, it hits the helmet. So it flies into the end zone. There's a defensive back there. He's right on it. And it's funny, listen to the broadcaster after. He's like, what is this guy doing? Instead of falling on the ball and ending the game, he's trying to scoop the ball in the end zone. And he throws it forward. Ponder is sitting there with, I think it was Porowski, the tight end. They both are there nearer to the ball than anybody else, and they both jump in to get it. The defensive back follows it, jumps in between them. I don't know how in the world he got the ball away. I almost wonder if those two guys knocked into each other and pushed the ball back out to him, because it looked like at the time when I'm in the end zone, I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter. Florida State fell on the ball in the end zone, but that cat comes out with a football.
Yeah, he ripped it out. He got it away from Ponder somehow. And, that team, although not a great team, it was Bowden's best team of the last probably 4 or 5 years that he was there, and that cost them a 10-win season. It might have cost them an ACC championship. I think if they win that game, they play for the ACC championship.
It's unbelievable. All right, that was number 10 on our list. That was definitely a painful one. I will never forget. You were probably there for the you were covering FSU right on beat at that point.
Yeah. Yep.
But do you remember the whole crazy thing with Dexter Carter and bringing out Marcus Sims and all that? I mean, that was surreal too.
Yeah, the whole thing. Like, yeah, Gene's talking about. We tried to get. We asked for Marcus after the game. He didn't come. We kind of knew that might happen. It's understandable. Then we asked for him the next practice. We didn't get him, and then the next practice we didn't get him. And then finally we were told, okay, Marcus Sims will talk. And look, if he'd have said, all he had to do was say, and he did. If he says, hey, he just doesn't want to talk about it, he's trying to move past it, he wouldn't have talked. We'd have been all right. But then it might have been Elliott at the time, was like, yeah, no, Marcus is going to talk. And so Marcus comes up, and finally after practice, it's dark. So it's October, November. He's talking to us on the practice fields, 6 or 7 reporters, and then Dexter Carter comes and tries to stop the interview, saying, why don't y'all let him go? And you know, the whole thing was just – and it's like, look, we you know, why are y'all going to talk to him every day about this? Like, well, this is the first time we've talked to him about it. And it wasn't great. Yeah. But I get it. Dexter was trying to protect one of his guys. But
I get it. Yeah.
It was bad for everyone.
All right. Let's move on to number 9 on the all-time – we're counting down the all-time worst – not necessarily worst losses, but I define it as gut-wrenching. So it's just the fan or whoever's invested in the program – just tore your heart out losing games like this. So I move up again. We have those, basically they're almost similar. Both that we mentioned, the 2 Georgia Tech games. There were 2 NC State games back to back. And we're talking about now the 2012 NC State game. And this is a really good, you know, we talked about before we had EJ Manuel on. 2012 was a pretty good darn team.
Yeah.
And this is one of those games you look back and say, man, how the season might have been different had they won this game where they're up 16-0. You got Chris Thompson has over 100 yards in the first half. I mean, you're so much better than this team right now. You're up 16-3, and you're going close to going into the fourth quarter. And somehow, Corey, you blow this game to Mike Glennon.
Yeah, I think that's the worst part is you blew it to Mike Glennon, who really didn't even do a whole lot. He just threw a bunch of 6-yard passes. And but the offense getting a goose egg in the second half. I'm telling you, if the people that haven't been to NC State, they allow you to leave the stadium if you're a fan and come back in. So if you're there at halftime, the place empties out. It looks like a high school game. And then slowly but surely they start coming back into the game. They're going out, you know what they might be doing in the parking lot. And then they come back maybe 25, 30 minutes later. I'm telling you, those people were leaving for good. They weren't just let's hang out for 20 minutes in the parking lot. They were ready to go. They were ready to go home. This was a wrap. That team's too good for us. We're lucky to only be down 16-0. I think NC State had like 4 first downs in the first half. And then Florida State just lets them back in the game because the offense just, you know, piddles around, doesn't do anything. And then it gets to be really crunch time, and they can't make any plays. EJ takes a terrible sack. And then Jimbo elects not to use his 10-year NFL, soon-to-be 10-year NFL veteran kicker, a 52-yard field goal, and instead punts. And then a few moments.
Is that the one that got blocked, or there was a punt that got blocked?
No, there was a punt that got blocked too. What happened was, I think this is the chronology, is that he didn't kick the field goal. Maybe 5 or 6 minutes left. They don't kick the field goal. He punts it. They do get inside the 5 or 10. They get the stop. Florida State gets the ball back. They throw a fade to Kelvin Benjamin that's ruled incomplete, although it kind of looked like he caught it. It was one of those Kelvin catches that he became famous for the next year. And then I think it's that punt after Florida State got the ball back that gets blocked. And then I think the final drive, Glennon's numbers were something crazy. Like I think he was 3 of 12 on the final drive, but he kept completing the 4th down pass.
Well, yeah, that's why I went back and looked. He converted 3 4th downs.
Yeah.
On that drive, including there was a 4th and 10 on that play that he completed. One of them, I think, was controversial, whether they even caught the ball on one of them.
Well, and then another thing, and the game's over, he throws a horrible pass that should end the game. He throws it right to Xavier Rhodes, who's standing there waiting on the interception, and then Tyler Hunter bats it away. So things like that happen that you remember. But, yeah, I think the bigger – you can nitpick at plays here and there, what could have happened. The defense could have come up with a stop. But, man, you can't get shut out. You can't get shut out with E.J. Manuel, Rashad Green, Kelvin Benjamin, Nick O'Leary, and Chris Thompson. You can't. And they did. And that's why they lost. The offense was just abysmal. Jimbo got way too conservative, didn't go for the throat. But what I thought was interesting when we talked to EJ on that war chat, which go listen to, by the way, it's the Clemson game, which was 2 weeks before this debacle, is he did think that NC State game taught the 2013 team what not to do. And as we remember, that 13 team, when they got a team down, they didn't just step on their neck, they broke it and then ripped their head off. That's what the 13 team did. The 2012 team didn't do that nearly as well, obviously.
Well, my final thing on this game, my memory is that you brought it up, is the sack. Here's the time. The sack to E.J. Manuel. What drove me nuts about that, at the time it's 16-10.
Yeah.
And you're in the 20 range. And you got Dustin Hopkins as your kicker. The game's over. You kick that, you go up 2 scores. There's only 5-6 minutes left in the game. There's no way Glennon is driving down for 2 scores with that amount of time left in the game. So it's over. And you talk about Jimbo being conservative, but at that point he decides to have Manuel go back and pass the ball, and EJ does that spin move. And that's one of the things you mentioned, Marcus Sims. If you go EJ Manuel spin move, I think most fans know what you're talking about. Then he takes a 15-yard loss on a sack. In that situation, it's just unbelievable to me that would happen in that situation. Still, I think Jimbo should have kicked it at that point. But still, the fact that you took a 15-yard sack when all you need is a field goal to put the game away, it's just mind-boggling.
Senior quarterback, too. Senior quarterback doing that. And I thought it'd be like a QB draw or something, or a QB sweep, something safe.
Yeah. Roll them out. Nobody's there. Just throw it out of bounds. Or
you're right. It's a 40-yard field goal. No guarantee that Hopkins makes it, but much better chance than a 54-yarder.
Yeah, no, it's not. So, and that was number 9. Moving up to number 8, and we're talking about this season a lot lately, Corey, and this is the 1980 game. I know one of our other just missed the cuts was the bowl game from that against Oklahoma, the 81 Orange Bowl, but a lot of people brought it up, and probably good reason, the 1980 game against Miami.
And that was a good Miami team, which you don't think of at the time because Miami was so bad. Miami was actually worse than Florida State in the late 70s and going into early 80s. But that was a good Miami team. Jim Kelly was the quarterback. I think they finished 18th in the country. Florida State didn't play particularly well that game, but Miami's only touchdown came after a bad pass interference call that was a 50-yard penalty because back then they didn't have 15. It was spotted the foul. It was a pass interference in the end zone. So that was the only touchdown Florida State gave up was a 1-yard quarterback sneak. And then Florida State goes down. It's 10-3 late in the game. Florida State drives down the field. Stockstill throws a touchdown pass to Childress to make it 10-9, and Bowden goes for 2. And it gets batted down. If he kicks the extra point, Gene, now remember bowls were weird and different back then. But I think there's a decent chance that if he kicks the extra point, that Florida State might have been playing Georgia for the national championship game.
And which would have been a lot easier matchup than Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they might win that game. If they win the game outright, they're probably playing Georgia for the national championship instead of Georgia getting to play Notre Dame and Florida State having to go play Oklahoma. So there's that game, no surprise if you're a Florida State fan, that Miami loss very well could have cost Florida State a national championship. That 1980 defense was insane, and that was a really good team, and they just picked a wrong day to play awfully. And then the next 2 weeks they beat number 3 Nebraska on the road, and then came back and beat number 3 Pitt at home. I think if you win those 2 games, and you're 7-0 because you've also beat a ranked Miami team.
Or 6-0-1, whatever.
No, 6-0-1. But I think if you win the Miami game for sure, I don't think there's any way Georgia is the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah.
Georgia, who beat one ranked team all the season, isn't going to be ranked ahead of you, and you're probably playing for the national championship in 1980. So that's a tough one that was 40 years ago. So I don't know how many people remember it, but the people that do know how big a loss that was for Florida State. It was an enormous one.
Well, it's an unravel. You're right how good Miami was. And I don't know if at the end, because we go back, we look at Noel Fan, we read, I love some of Bill McGroth's old, because I love back then, he's given a play-by-play, and he's describing. It's kind of writing we don't see anymore. So I enjoy that. But, I didn't realize, I guess at the time, I don't know if it was at the end of the season or at the time, Miami had the number 1 ranked rush defense. Florida State only rushed for 25 yards on 33 carries. Yeah,
what's funny, too, is that Miami missed 3 field goals that day. 3, and 2 of them were short ones. That kind of would have put them up by it would have made it 13-3.
But the one they made, you know what? The guy, Bobby Butler, got his hand on the ball because when reading McGroth's story, he talks about he had his hand on the ball, and he was verklempt that somehow he got his hand on the ball, thought he had the block, and somehow the ball still snuck through the uprights.
Yeah, snuck through the uprights. And if you block that kick and it doesn't go in, you win that game too. So just a lot. You win it that way too. So yeah, a lot of bad luck for the Noles.
Bad mojo, but that happened a lot between. You go back from that point up to some of the 90s. Obviously, Florida State seemed to have the jinx against them when it came to Miami games. I don't know what it was, but it started about then. All right, so we're up to number 7 now, and we got our national championship we're going to talk about here. This is, I wouldn't even call it gut-wrenching, Corey. I would call it more of a frustrating loss for Florida State, and that is the 1999 Fiesta Bowl loss to Tennessee. So we're talking about the 98 season. You got there against Tennessee. You were a heavy favorite in this game, but I guess the frustrating thing is you didn't have Chris Winkie in this game. So you had to start Marcus Allen. Remember, early in the season, Dan Kendrick got hurt. So effectively, you were down to your third-string quarterback. Now, Florida State was able to do well enough against Florida to get that win with Marcus Allen, be creative. But there's a big drop-off at quarterback in this game. Tennessee jumped out to the huge lead, got 14-0 early. But Florida State battle, made it close at the end. But, man, you just felt like Florida State was playing with one hand tied behind its back in this game.
Yeah, you think, okay, well, they only lost by a touchdown without Winkie. You assume Winkie's worth – the disparity between Winkie and Alton is worth what, 10 points, 14 points, 21 points? Who knows? But, Winkie had the awful game against NC State that year and then did throw another interception the rest of the year. So he was coming into his own. He was becoming Chris Winkie. And I just think there's no way you lose that game if he's your quarterback. I can't prove that. There's no way to prove that. I don't think they have the pick six. That was a huge play in the game. Yeah. And then the Peerless Price touchdown when you're only trailing, I guess it was 14-9 at the time.
Yeah, it was correct.
And you give up a 80-yard touchdown to Peerless Price. Two things that always stood out about that game was that for as great as Peter Warrick was, and he was incredible, he only had one catch in that game for 7 yards, but he busted a 50-yard punt return. One of those returns where he's making guys miss, he's stopping and starting. It's like an N1 mixtape. They're flying all over the place. And now he's just free. It's him and the punter. That's the only person he can beat to get to the end zone is the punter. And he's got a 10-yard head. He's coming at the punter, but it's like the punter's on him. Like he's got 10 yards to make a move. And I can't remember the punter's name. I want to say it was like one of those Colquitts. But he makes the best tackle on Peter Warrick in Peter Warrick's career in college football. One-on-one in open space, he gets Peter Warrick between the hips and puts him on the ground at like the 20. And instead of getting a touchdown, they have to settle for a field goal. Janikowski missed an extra point in that game. Crazy things. And then I just think they didn't use Minor enough. I think.
I'm glad you said that. That was one of my takeaways from this. So Travis Minor finished 15 carries, 83 yards, but he was running almost 6 yards a carry. He was consistently good in that game.
Yeah.
But they just had Marcus Allen pass the ball too much in this game. I just didn't understand that. That was not – you could.
Well, what always bothered me about that, Gene, was that the very first play of that game, they had a month to prepare for Tennessee, a great Tennessee team, and Marcus Allen's your quarterback. The very first play of that game for Florida State, Peter Warrick is in the Wildcat. He's in the shotgun. And they get a delay of game or they get a false start. Peter Warrick never lines back up at quarterback again. If I've got a month to prepare for the national championship game, I'm going to let it ride on number 9 being the guy that has the ball 25 times or 30 times in every way I can get him the ball, and not Marcus Allen. All love to the Rooster, but you got to ride Peter Warrick in that game. You didn't know he was coming back. You got lucky he came back for his senior year. That could have been his last game, and I just thought they left way too many bullets in the chamber by only getting the ball. Literally got the ball to Peter Warrick one time. He had one catch. That was his only touch of the game other than the punt return.
And to your point, with 1 week before the Florida game, he did it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
That may be even better defense. What are you doing against Tennessee? You're right. The other thing that I just have the image sitting in the end zone of that game, seeing the best pass Steve Martin's ever made in his life.
Yeah.
The Fearless Price, because Mario Edwards, and I feel bad for him, he was draped all over him on the sideline. I still don't know how that ball got through. I mean, there was about this much margin to get that ball in there, and that's exactly where he put it on the ball.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, great catch, great throw. There's no shame in losing to that Tennessee team. That was a good Tennessee team. If you look at that roster and how many guys went to the league, it's just that I think over the course of those 60 minutes, you proved that if you were on your third-string quarterback, you're going to win that game. It was just bad luck that you were on your third string quarterback.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to go to number 6 here now. Stay tuned. We're going to take a little while because this is a little bit depressing talking about all those losses.
Right.
Give us a week or two. We'll roll out 5-1, and we'll do that again just like we're doing in this video here. So give us a little bit of time. But so it may take you a while to kind of calm down, have a couple drinks, chill out, watch a couple war chats. We'll talk about some wins, get your mind in the right state. But anyway, let's further ado. We're going to go 1992 at Miami. Of course, it's known better as wide right 2. And it, made it more painful that it was coming on the heels of wide right 1. Certainly you can't lose another game by missing a chip shot field goal at the end of the game, and Florida State did it. And this is it's a weird game. It was kind of an ugly game, honestly. If you go back and look at it, I mean, Vanover has it was the opening kickoff, right? He has a return for a touchdown. And then Florida State does effectively nothing till the end of the game. And just two really good defensive teams just squaring off and just slugging punches at each other.
I think at the time, there's no way, and look, you guys can probably imagine where some of the other losses that we haven't talked about are going to be on this list. To me, being at that game and being around Florida State fans, the 92 one, it wasn't the same vibe as the 91 one.
No.
Number one, it was fresh. I mean, it just happened before, so you had experience with it. Even if he makes it, it's a tie. And back then in college football, obviously, not only did they not have overtime, but if you tie a game, you're still kind of alive for a national championship berth. But usually back then, or a good portion of the time back then, if you weren't undefeated, it was going to be tough. So even if he made it, you weren't winning the game. And what makes it so frustrating, number one, is if the coaches could have only known in October, hey, why don't we put 17 just in the shotgun and put 4 wides and just let him do what he does instead of still trying to force that pro style of that 3 receiver set into Charlie Ward under center. But because Florida State was so good at the end of that season, I don't think there's any question they would have beaten Miami if they had played them November 10th instead of in October or November 18th. And on top of that, I don't think there's much question in my mind, and I know I'm probably biased, that they beat that Alabama team. So losing that because I think, Gene, if he makes that field goal, don't you think Miami and Florida State both finished the season 11-0-1. Florida State has now debuted in the last month. Because if you watch that game, you might have thought, well, Miami was probably better than Florida State. Florida State made a nice drive at the end. But then if you're thinking about, okay, who's the better team now? Well, Florida State just ripped the tar out of Florida and then scored 70 points in the back in the 2-point.
That was you're right that night. Yeah, that's right. Because Florida that was a spurry. That was a really good top 10.
Florida. Yeah.
And they beat the snot out of them.
Florida State beat the snot out of them. And all of a sudden, Florida State's offense looked like the best thing that any college football team had ever had, like legitimately.
Yeah.
So they scored 70 points in one game, 69 points in the next, and then had 38 points at the half on Florida. So they looked like the best team in the country. So if their record at the end of November had been 11-0-1 and Miami had been 11-0-1, don't you think the voters go with the team that is red hot at the end of the year and was on the road?
Yeah, I was going to say the tiebreaker has to be Miami tied at home. This was game there, so you got to give the benefit. You're right. I don't think there's any doubt they would. But, it goes back to hindsight. It goes back to 87. Same thing. Had they known at 87, don't go for 2, we kick the extra point, we're playing for a national championship, I'm sure it would.
But I think that's when you talk about frustration, I think that's what made, like the Tennessee game, I think that's what makes the wide right game so frustrating, the wide right 2, is that, if he makes that kick, you don't win the game, tie the game, but you're playing for a national championship almost certainly. Not almost certainly, but probably you're playing for a national championship. And I don't think there's any team in the country that would have beaten the 92 Florida State team at the end of the year. I think the 92 Florida State team at the end of the year was better than the 93 Florida State team, because the 92 Florida State team had a defensive line of 4 guys that were all drafted in the second round, and they had a guy named Marvin Jones. So you have that, and you still have all the same offensive guys, except for work done.
And this was the game with the big hit that you've got the poster of Marvin Jones.
Yeah. You think about the linebackers in that game, Gene. Miami had Barrow, Armstead, and Darren Smith, who've all probably played a combined 30 years in the league. And Florida State had Marvin Jones and Derek Brooks.
Jeez.
That game was nuts, and you had
to be the best linebacker group in college football history on the field at the same time. I guess one of the things why this makes our list as high as it is, because I think with every tough loss to Miami, it kind of builds and builds and builds. So at this point, after this, I think Florida State was 3-10 against Miami over the last 13 years. 5 of those games were decided by 3 points or less, and every one of those came down the last minute. And you would have lost every single one of those to Miami. The 3 games you'd won, you beat Miami by 2 touchdowns or more.
Yeah.
So every tight game was down to the minute against Miami over almost a decade and a half, and you'd lost every single one of those close ones. So this was just another one of those, and it just builds a frustration in the fan base. So I think that's one of the reasons why this game is up as number 6 overall.
Yeah, I think, and you think about, 83, you lost by a point on Miami made a field goal at the last second.
We'll go back to 80. I mean, we talked about that game.
Yeah, the 81, and then, you had the lead. In 85, you had the lead in the fourth quarter. 83, you had the lead in the fourth quarter. 87, you had the lead in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
91, you had the lead. 92, you had the lead. It wasn't just that they were close games. You had the lead in all of them.
Yeah.
And this was, later on in the decade, there were some other ones too, but that one was like, what? Why does this keep happening? The crazy thing about that season, Gene, I don't know if you remember it, but after they beat Florida that year, the 92 to end the regular season, Florida was going to play in the SEC championship game the following week, the inaugural SEC championship game. And so all Florida State, I remember there was a sign on bills that said, "Go Gators, beat Bama."
Oh, yeah.
Because if Florida beats Alabama in that game, then it's Florida State Miami for the national championship.
You're right. I remember that was the first time in my life I've ever rooted for Florida.
And you saw what happened. That's
why. Yeah.
Yeah, who was the
Antonio Lott?
Antonio Langham intercepts the pass, was it a touchdown? So Florida ended up losing Alabama in overtime or late in the fourth quarter, and then Miami goes and gets embarrassed by Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. So hey, at least that's the silver lining, right? That's the silver lining, I think, if you're a Florida State fan, although you'd much rather have a national championship, is that if Florida State makes that game, you never have George Teague run down Lamar Thomas and rip the ball out from him like he's a child.
Yeah, that was fun.
At least you had that moment if you're a Florida State fan.
Yeah. All right, man, this has been I wouldn't say a fun stroll down memory lane, but it was, again, these memories stay with us forever, Corey. But it's kind of good to get it off our chest. I mean, sometimes it's good to look back at this thing. We're all in the same community. It's good to just say, hey, let's share in our misery. What they say, misery loves company. So there we go. So anyway, we've unveiled our 6 through 10 and some of the others that were nearby there. And stay tuned. A couple weeks from now, Corey and I'll get back together. You'll have another write-up. And hopefully, if you're seeing this video, just the video, we can go to warchant.com. Corey's got a full write-up on these games with a little bit more details on them. I think Ira's going to put in some YouTube clips from these things too. If you want to see a bunch of wide rights and Ty Jones knocking the ball out of Ponder's hands, you can look at the videos too. We'll have
the way I see it, Gene, is people have been it's been too feel good around here lately in this country. Too many good things are happening. Let's bring people down to earth a little bit and give them something to be sad about. So it's a perfect timing for this.
Well, you need a little vinegar. You can't have all sweets. It's got to balance
exactly
it out.
Right. Understood.
All right, good work, Corey. It's been fun talking about this, but stay tuned. Trust me, Corey and I will have some more war chats. It'll be much more uplifting. We'll talk about some positive games. If you don't like this negative stuff, don't worry. We got plenty of positive stuff for you coming up. warchant.com. Good work, Corey. Thanks, buddy.